Welcome back to Inside Story. I'm Ray Suarez. We're looking back on the big stories of 2013. Again, our guests are Gerald Seib, Washington bureau chief of the Wall Street Journal, Pilar Marrero, a journalist with La Opinión and author of Killing the American Dream, Tevi Troy, former Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services in the administration of George W. Bush, and from Atlanta, Jason Johnson, a political science professor at Hiram College. And Professor Johnson, two of the big overseas stories had tremendous repercussions here at home. One of NSA spying on foreign leaders and heavy surveillance operations going on in foreign countries, and also the step back at the last minute from going ahead with some sort of strike in Syria to move against the stockpiles of chemical weapons held by Bashar al-Assad. What do you make of those? And how did Americans, looking at that, was there a certain weariness with the rest of the world that made Americans want to pull back?
Well, I think it's two completely different situations. I think Edward Snowden, the significance of him was to those active American citizens who are already fearing the encroachment of the state. This has been going on since the passage of the Patriot Act. And then there's another group of Americans, sort of dissidents, who often say, look, this has been going on for years. Edward Snowden just put a white middle-class face on the fact that the United States government has been surveilling dissident groups, Indian activists in the 70s, African Americans. This has been going on in this country for years. So it sort of brought up the debate of what our government is really doing and whether we trust the transparency supposedly promoted by the Obama administration. But I think Syria is different. I think it's an example of Barack Obama using the belligerence of the previous administration to sort of frighten another nation into acquiescing to UN mores. I mean, all the president had to do was pretty much reach into his coat and everybody jumped like he was pulling out a weapon. He basically got Assad to agree to UN inspectors to get rid of chemical weapons without having to fire a shot. And that's a reflection of the fact that for 8 years we had George Bush, and many people around the world felt like America was capable of anything. So it's sort of a reflection of using the past and the future to change policy today.
Tevi Troy, being strong by not having to show how strong you are?
Well, I think President Bush would appreciate Professor Johnson's compliment, but I think there was something else going on with the Syria speech. I think President Obama gave this speech. It was a nationally televised address, and President Obama had really overexposed himself in the 2012 campaign. He was going on late-night talk shows, and he was appearing on DJ shows in the Midwest and in the South. And he shows up and he tries to talk about Syria in a serious way, and it seemed like the American people weren't interested and it had kind of moved on from that. So without having the American people behind him, it was hard for him to pursue any other options.
Jerry Seib?
Well, I think that's true. I think the hidden story there was the fact that if that congressional vote had gone ahead, it might not have succeeded. And that tells you, as you were suggesting, Ray, at the outset, that there wasn't a sense of let's pull back a little bit. And I think when the president said what if his predecessors had said, let's take an action in the Middle East that's necessary for U.S. national security, he looked over his shoulder and found not everybody's falling into line. And that's a real statement about the times that we're in.
Pilar, Evo Morales' plane returning to South America was stopped over Europe because they thought that Edward Snowden might be aboard. Dilma Rousseff, the president of Brazil, didn't come to the United States because it emerged that she had been closely surveilled by the NSA. Latinos in the South Hemisphere often complain that they don't get enough attention from the United States. Here they were getting a lot.
Not the right kind of attention, I would propose. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the Obama administration has not really given that much attention to Latin America. Maybe it's a good thing in some ways. The fact that Hugo Chavez died this year also made the major figure in Latin America disappear from the radar of the United States. So in a way, with his death, the disappearance of a leader that would actually be able to bring together different countries in Latin America to present a united front in regards to the United States, also just makes it less important for the United States to pay attention to what's going on south of the border.
We also had the first Pope from the Global South, and Pope Francis has been a phenomenon, Jerry Seib. I mean, a pope with a 90% approval rating. Yeah. Who ever heard of such a thing?
Well, no, and I cited Syria as top story when we started out here. The Pope, I think, is close behind. His appointment, his election has the potential to have long-term consequences, long-term impact. In the U.S., it's already brought people back to the Catholic Church, Catholics who had sort of fallen away because they were unhappy with the tenor of the Church, but also to redirect the international Church, to focus less on politics, more on people, more on poverty, more on social issues. That's a huge change, and it affects literally every country in the world.
Tevi, if you're interested in public affairs, but you're not Catholic and you're an observant Jew, is this someone you're watching?
Absolutely. You know, one thing I've found interesting about the whole Pope issue is that he seems to unite conservatives and liberal Catholics in America. They both seem to like him. So it's very rare to find things that are bringing folks together these days. So I'm glad to see this one.
Professor Johnson?
Yeah, I think Pope Francis read the Republican post-2012 autopsy. And he figured out that, you know, it's not about changing the message, it's changing what we're going to focus on. And I think anyone who actually understands the Judeo-Christian Bible knows that a focus on poverty and people who are suffering has always been more of Jesus's message than whether or not you were sleeping with this person or how much you paid in taxes. And so him really taking a conservative way of reorienting the Catholic Church, I think it makes everybody happy, and it stays away from those hot button issues that have been a problem for the Church.
You know, one of the big fake stories, Pilar, that came out of that election was, is this guy really a Latin American? His parents were immigrants from Italy to Argentina. Is he really? Well, I think that hasn't really lived all the way to the end of 2013. But is he putting a Latin American stamp on the papacy?
Well, he might be, and it is ironic because he comes from a country that had a military dictatorship at the time that he was going up in the ranks of the church. And he was questioned in Argentina for the things that he did and didn't do at the time of the military dictatorship. But now that we see him in Rome acting the way he is, we realize, you know, this is a different guy than we thought he was.
You know, 2013 was so big a year, it was impossible really to stuff it all into this short conversation. Just from my cheat sheet here, the Supreme Court decisions on gay marriage, affirmative action, and the Voting Rights Act. The government shutdown. We didn't even touch the government shutdown. We're going to have you all back. 2013 is too big. Happy New Year to you all. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
That brings us to the end of this edition of Inside Story. The program may be over, but the conversation continues. We want to hear what you think about the issues today or on any day's show.